Thank you for all these thoughts from your experience about working with education. I would, I think everyone is kind of curious to hear about your experience at the library. And it's actually not one library, right? It's
One of my slides, I'll move my slides to where. Um, so the slide showing now is my working environment at Oxford. So the building on the right is where I was based. But yes, this is a library that's more than 400 years old in a university which is ancient, one of the world's oldest universities. And it's incredibly complex as well because it's a university with a college system. So as well as there being all of the faculties and schools and departments for the different subjects, when you study at Oxford, you have different colleges that you're associated with. So within about a mile of where I was based in Oxford, there are about 127, 128 libraries, because there were departmental libraries and there were college libraries. There was a law library, a medical library, and so on. So it's very complex. So the Bodleian is actually a group of libraries which is part of a system of more than 100 libraries which serve this university
mhm.
across all the different subjects. Not just holding on to the books or not just having displays, but there's a lot of researchers, actual research projects within the Bodleian Library system itself. So there are lots of academic experts, and they're studying, say, the literature, the medieval Middle East, or the scholarly societies of early modern Europe, and so on. So there's the combination of the serving students and supporting process of education. They're also preserving an enormous amount of priceless knowledge and culture for the future, and doing new research on the time and creating new kind of state-of-the-art databases, research outputs, and so on.
So yeah, it's such a beautiful building. I had a chance to actually see it in person a few years back. So besides being in beautiful Oxford, what it being in the in this position of Wikimedian in residence actually meant for you?
Um, it was an opportunity. There were things I was brought in specifically to do. So to help the reach of images from the Bodleian on Wikipedia and the related platforms. And people weren't so aware of Wikidata. So I had to actively kind of evangelize, I had to promote, and sometimes that was setting up meetings with people, sometimes emailing people out the blue, sometimes see someone else do a talk and I'd follow up with them. Did you know that there's information about your topic on Wikidata? Sometimes just getting into a staff meeting and of researchers or curators. There are 4 museums. I should mention the 4 museums in the university, as well as the many, many libraries. And this is the time when the glam part of Oxford was joining up more. So the 4 museums and the Botanic Gardens and libraries were forming into one organization. And they were realizing how the information needs to be joined up. So I'm going to go to a slide, which is, if you're looking for information about one topic, well, there's no Oxford overview or knowledge base. You've basically got to search and put your search term into the museum catalogue and into the research directory to find papers, and into the other museum and into the kind of biographical dictionary. So there are hundreds of these. You can't just follow a link from the art in a museum to the biography of that artist somewhere else in a biographical publication. So they're conscious that there is this problem. This information needs to be joined up in kind of like a web. And so I was there to say, well, Wikidata is one way to do this. And it already exists. So you could build something at great expense yourself, but there are things that already exist, which are already joining up culture, joining up artifacts from different museums, things like Somerville paintings representing culture, things like Wikisite, joining up publications from different journals and repositories. So I was allowed for quite a while to experiment with sharing information on Wikidata and with forming working relationships with people who were interested.
Can you show us some examples as to your experiments?
I'll mention this blog post, which I'm showing as the slide now. So I mentioned there's an expert on manuscripts of the medieval Middle East, and this expert, when they published a blog post because a manuscript had been digitized, and you could read the whole high-resolution digital manuscript on the Bodleian website, and this was announced in the blog post. And this is where I could say, well, how does this join up to other things? And so I translated his blog post line by line into Wikidata statements. So I created a Wikidata item about this manuscript and then put in facts about it. So its language, its what literary work it's a manuscript of, and where it is digitally on the web, and made the point that this isn't much more. This is less effort than writing the blog post, but it's more sustainable. Now I've added the data to a data set that people can use to find things. I'm laying down the pathways. And so really useful for this was to what I call Wikidata storytelling. So where you do a query that gets a chunk of web and you show people. So in the original blog post I'm working from, there's a sequence of facts. So Timur, he had a grandson. The grandson owned the manuscript, the Shahnameh of Ibrahim Sultan, that was owned by Gore Ousley there at the top, and it's now in the collection of the Bodleian Library. No matter web is, you can approach it from different directions, and there's no one narrative. So we could be interested in the literary work, in which case we're interested in this book at the bottom that's an English translation of that literary work, or we might be interested in that type of manuscript from that era, in which case we're also interested in that the royal collection, the collection of the British royal family, has another manuscript from the same time. Or we might be interested in this family of Timur and the Timurid dynasty. And so showing this was really useful to make concrete to people that were building a web, and that the findability of anyone, a research result or a digital manuscript, is the number of links you make to it from related things. So if I'm interested in Ibrahim Sultan, it should be made available to me by search engines or search tools or whatever, that something he owned is now at the Bodleian Library and can be viewed today.
Yeah, and this is actually a live query. Can you click on it so the students can
sure.
can see it live?
So this is using the graph function. And so this is, let me make the text bigger. This is the template query that I created and others have improved that takes a list of queue numbers.
Just a second, Martin. We are still stuck on the PowerPoint.
Oh no, right.
Did you share your screen or the PowerPoint?
I've just shared. Excuse me. I've just.
So unshare and reshare.
Okay.
If you can.
Okay. entire screen.
Yay, okay.
Right, and then okay, I should be in a different tab on this. Oh, that's very psychedelic. Right. So hopefully you can see some sparkle now.
Yes, can you enlarge it just a bit? Much better.
So this is a template. Basically, this doesn't change from whatever subject I'm illustrating, but it takes a list of Wikidata identifiers. So I've chosen this list to be things that are interconnected, but I've not specified the connections between them. So normally a Sparkle query, you have some properties of interest and you ask for things that have those properties. And this is the inverse, which is just as legitimate to do. You specify some things and ask for the connections between them. So this has been used. It's kind of an artificial way to extract a bit of the knowledge graph out of the billions of different connections that there are in Wikidata, and then get this lovely stretchy graph. And people like the stretchy effect. And I don't think, oh yeah, so I can go to individual, right, so I can get other properties of this thing, but the interface isn't very usable. So yeah, making, showing connections between what one organization wants to talk about. So the Bodleian wants to talk about the fact that it has this manuscript, but Wikidata already knew that the Royal Collection has a manuscript of the same work. And the library database already knew, or that the Wikidata already had the bibliographic information that there's this English translation of the work. So it's showing that it's joining up one set of information with other things that exist. So work has been done by other people. That's got to be a kind of persuasive thing, that other people that have done some of the work is persuasive when we're talking about the kind of the whether this is worth doing and whether it's cost effective and whether it's worth an organization committing to. I'll go back to my slides because that's a bit dizzy. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll give another few examples. So within Oxford, there's a dictionary of artists, which is the Benezet Dictionary of Artists. And there's also museums. There's an arts museum, and lots of the artists in the Art Museum are in the Biographical Dictionary. But is there a link between them? No. You've got to separately go to the museum catalogue and search what you're interested in. And if you see an artist's name and want to know more, you've got to go to a completely different site and different interface and do a search there, and you might get something or might not. But with Wikidata, there's a Benezet link property, and there's a collection property. So we can ask for artists who have made works. The works are in the collection of the Ashmolean Museum. Get the Benezet link of the artist. So this joins together those two sources of information in a way that would not be feasible humanly. It'd take thousands and thousands of clicks back and forth. And this is kind of raw, but this could be the basis for a nice interface, like a nice widget that's built into a search tool or a museum catalog to give contextual information to the catalogers or to somebody studying this topic. And because I shared information from the Ashmolean Museum, obviously there are other GLAM projects sharing information at the same time. So we could look at kind of the fingerprints of collections in terms of what artists are represented or what kind of things are depicted in the collections, what's the topics of the art. So I could do what things are. So you might have the Buddha is depicted in art in the Ashmolean Museum and also in a number of things in the Cleveland Museum. So it's better than you could do with keywords. This could be done with collections of publications as well, journals or research repositories, that you might have keywords describing them, and that will tell you whether they are similar, but that's very imprecise. When you have detailed information in Wikidata, you can do a comparison, like how well do these things match. And one part of the university I worked with was the Voltaire Foundation. So Voltaire, a great European intellectual who wrote comedy, wrote philosophy, did experimental science, wrote history, wrote theatre criticism. And so they were kind of doing the definitive editions of his works, and want to know how well known, how kind of culturally well known was Voltaire's work. And it turns out his philosophy is really well known, and his history is kind of unknown in the present day. People don't realize he was a really important historian. And I could ask Wikidata for everything authored by Voltaire, how many Wikipedia articles, so how many different language editions of Wikipedia are there? And that would give me a rough measure of kind of the cultural significance or awareness of those things. So that's kind of a table with numbers, but that could be put into, and was put into, a Historypedia timeline. So Historypedia, I hope you've covered in other lectures, but just makes a fantastic.
The students will meet. The students will meet Navina separately.
Okay, so Historypedia is a tool to make interactive timelines. It can do it with Wikipedia categories, but it can also do it with a Wikidata Sparkle query. So you can make, I don't know if I have a link right here, but if you have some things that are attached to points in time, there could be births of people, could be the publication of a book, could be discoveries and so on. You can put that query into Historypedia, which will give you a nice interactive, colorful. I think I've got a slide later on. Yes, okay, it's my next slide. So this was really useful because this was just a nicer interface than what they normally have for these research outputs or catalogs. So I could get publication dates of works by Voltaire and bring that up, and the front covers of the books would be, or the title pages, sorry, of the books would be the images that come up in the timeline. There were also research projects in the Bodleian looking at intellectuals, early modern intellectuals, 17th century intellectuals, the people who formed the first scholarly societies and the connections between them. So maybe they corresponded with each other, or they influenced each other, or maybe they attended the same societies and same meetings. And some of that, a lot of that kind of information is in Wikidata already. So I could get data from the research project which define which people they're interested in, which of these intellectuals they're studying. So that was in the form of an identifier. So I'd create an identifier in Wikidata and import the individual identifiers, and then ask Wikidata for these people and the scholarly societies they were members of, and then plot by their birth date, I think, on a graph. So it's color coded by the societies they're members of, like the Royal Society or the Académie Française. So that's a timeline view of this particular bit of intellectual history. There's also a group membership graph. So you can use the graph function to, if somebody is a member of the Royal Society and the French Academy and the Prussian Academy, you could have a node with that one person pointing to those three things. And so you can group people together according to which societies they're members of. So this was a kind of visualization, which is just not possible with this would be a big project in itself, normally, to create these timelines or charts, but it's just so immediate with Wikidata once you've got the data in there.
With a focus on having the data there, right? For instance, you mentioning the Cleveland Museum before is just because they ended up releasing 300,000 items from their collection under CC0 license, and have worked with our community to basically import that information, their metadata, into Wikidata. That's why it was easy for you to explore that specific example.
Yeah. And there wasn't a policy, and there isn't as such a policy in Oxford to do that. But I mean, I want it to be the default, and I'm going to push for it to be the default in the different organizations I work with. But I was allowed different sets of information. Sometimes that it was part of a museum collection, which I could describe in detail on Wikidata, or sometimes it was just a collection of individuals and their identifiers. So not much information about them, but I could share the identifiers, which themselves are pointers to further information about that person.
Right.
I'll jump forward to this. So this is something I use to kind of deal with the fear because there's a fear that comes, I control my catalog, I control my research database. Are you asking me to give up control, give it away? And I say, no, you're the authority, you are in charge of your database, making sure it's reliable, and we need that to exist. Because Wikipedia and Wikidata need sources. They have to be summaries of what's already published, but there's a surface level. So what it is, where it is, and what it's called, you can do that with your collection. If you're studying the people who are members of scholarly societies, you can do that with people. If you're doing art, you can do that with sculptures and paintings. If you're doing that with publications, you could do that with books, like the books created by Voltaire. So if all of these different databases, the catalogs, the research projects, the people studying Voltaire, they all share that surface level of what they got, they're creating pathways to what I call the meat, where people will find more detail about the object in the museum or the book by Voltaire.